My name is Victor Furman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. In 1970, Mike Pinder of the Moody Blues contributed a song to their album Question of Balance. Pinder's lyrics ask the quintessential human question. How is it we are here, on this path we walk, in this world of pointless fear, filled with empty talk? Descending from the apes, as scientist priests all think, will they save us in the end? We're trembling on the brink. Who are we? How did we come to populate planet Earth? Were we created by a divine being, an evolutionary process, or are we the product of alien intervention or even hybridization? Furthermore, are we the first human civilization to walk this earth, or have there been countless civilizations before us, before archaeological records and conscious memory? My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Dr. Rita Louise, has been asking these questions and seeking their answers since childhood. Fran Drescher's delivery without the wine is how one audience member put Dr. Rita Louise's frank, funny, yet honest approach. Through a powerful synthesis of science and ancient wisdom, her unique insights bridge the worlds of science, spirit, and culture and are changing the way we view our place in this world. Her high-content presentations and down-to-earth strategies empower and motivate audience members to think outside the box. Her unique presentations offer many down-to-earth strategies and empowering solutions. Her deep insights inspire, invigorate, and energize people into looking at the world in a completely new way. She's been featured on numerous radio and television shows, including Coast to Coast with George Noory, Mysterious Universe Radio, The Jerry Pippin Show, X Zone Radio, Veritas Radio, Fringe Radio, Out of This World Radio, and of course her favorite show, Destination Unlimited. Her previous books include Avoiding the Cosmic 2x4, The Power Within, The E.T. Chronicles, What Myths and Legends Tell Us About Human Origins and Dark Angels. Her website is soulhealer.com, and she joins us this week to discuss her new book, Stepping Out of Eden. Please welcome to Destination Unlimited, Dr. Rita Louise. Good evening, Rita.
Hey, Victor. So nice to hear your voice.
And lovely to have your voice and have you back on with us. It's been way too long. I've always felt like you and I are soul family from different family backgrounds, but we came to share the same interests and wicked sense of humor growing up. You think?
I think so.
You were originally from New York, weren't you?
Mm-hmm.
You were both a couple of New Yorkers, right? New Yorkers, native New Yorkers. But somewhere along the line, you lost your New York accent, and I sort of lost my New York accent, so I guess...
my family says that I sound like I'm from the South now.
Yeah, well, you are from the South now, but that's another story.
I know, but that's kind of scary. But because no one in the South thinks I'm from the South.
That's true. So. Everybody who meets me thinks I'm from New York, but, whatever. In any event, Rita, tell us about your early life and how you developed your interest in metaphysics, physics, and energy. You really had a supported mom in that regard, didn't you?
Well, not in the metaphysics part. My mom was, she's a sci-fi gal. So I remember her taking us to go see like Planet of the Apes, or one of her favorite movies or books, it was the book, was 2001, A Space Odyssey. And I remember her giving us a dime and sending us to the movie theater to go see it. Now, other than it was pretty cool and I really didn't understand the end of what that meant, but we were always watching shows like The Prisoner or, horror movies. And that was really the environment that I grew up in, was looking at the world from a different perspective. and being open to these different perspectives, and the possibilities that are out there.
You mentioned The Prisoner. The Prisoner was probably one of my favorite shows. And for those who are not familiar from that generation back then, The Prisoner was a show created by an actor by the name of Patrick McGowan. And it was a follow-up, a sequel to his original show, which was Secret Agent Man, where he was a British Secret Service agent. And in The Prisoner, he's decided he's resigning from the Secret Service. You don't know that it's him in the same context of the original series, but you see him handing in his resignation and getting ready to leave, and all of a sudden he's abducted, and he winds up on this place called The Island, where everyone is assigned a number. And his number was number 6. He has frequent conversations with number 2, but until the very last episode, he doesn't meet number 1. And guess who number 1 was? Rita, you remember who number 1 was?
I don't remember.
He was number 1.
Oh, that's right. I am not a number. I am a free man.
And the context of the show, the moral of the story was that we're all prisoners of our own mind. We are number 1 to ourselves.
And actually, if you're a conspiracy theory kind of person and you haven't seen The Prisoner, well worth watching.
Absolutely. I think they tried to do a remake, but it bombed a couple of years back. But the original series, I think, was only 10 or 11 episodes. And
17.
It was 17? I don't really remember.
It was 17. I have it on DVD now.
Wow.
And there was, and it's interesting because there's the way the episodes originally aired, and then they went and analyzed them and reordered them to make it be where he's on the island and he's very confused. But then as it progresses, he kind of figures out what's going on. And then he starts playing tricks on them back.
Right.
And so he kind of evolves through this story if you watch it in the revised order. But yeah, 17 episodes.
Wonderful show if you have a chance. So you went from being a mechanical engineer to metaphysician and healer. How did that happen?
I was always interested in ESP. I mean, I'm sure you remember The Amazing Kreskin.
Absolutely.
I used to watch that show with and then there was a TV show called The Sixth Sense that starred Gary Collins, who is Dr. Michael Rhodes, a college professor who taught paranormal studies.
Absolutely.
And he had ESP. And he would walk into a room and touch a glass, and he would see the dead body or, the corporeal image of, Mr. Green floating through the room, and he would give him a clue as to who killed him. And I thought that was the coolest thing. And so I went from reading books on archaeology and anthropology to reading books on ESP and personal growth, Be Here Now, Ram Dass, anything I could get my hands on, because that whole genre was just really starting to take off.
And just share with our listeners how your healing practice evolved and what is it that you do?
So my healing practice is I am a medical intuitive. So if people aren't familiar with that concept, a medical intuitive is someone who has a psychic gift, intuition, and uses it to help people with their health-related concerns. And it doesn't mean that, if there's an issue in your relationship, that you can talk to a medical intuitive about that as well. But it focuses more on health and healing. When I work with people, I help them to understand what's going on in their body functionally. So if you have an issue in your kidney, I'll talk about, there's some inflammation here or this isn't working there. But I believe that with the majority of health concerns, there is some psycho-spiritual or emotional component that made it manifest in the first place. And so part of the session is to help my clients to understand what the beliefs are or limiting thoughts that are contributing to their health concern as well.
And for our listeners who may be interested in that, how can they find out more about that work that you do? And
actually, I'm going to give a different site, which is more the health and healing site. It would be medical-intuitives with an S.com. So medical-intuitives.com. www.eden.com.
Now, your new book, Stepping Out of Eden, is the culmination of a re-examination of much of the foundational work you had done with new research and insights. What inspired you to write Stepping Out of Eden?
Well, when I had written my last book, E.T. Chronicles, there was just so much material. And one of the things that I wanted to look at in writing that book was the nature of ritual and our connection with God. But even though the other book talks about the gods and the history of the gods, quote unquote, through time up until the creation of humanity, it really wasn't the format. It wasn't the place to address that concept. And to put it into that book would have been this like totally huge tangent into someplace else. So I decided to hold off and revisit this whole concept about us and our place in the universe.
Wonderful. My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Dr. Rita Louise. Her book is called Stepping Out of Eden, and we'll be back with more of Rita after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Tune in to The Practical Intuitive, Mind, Body, Spirit for the Real World with me, host Robin Fritz, Mondays at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 Eastern. I'll cover personal and business intuition, animal communication, mediumship, space clearing, past life regression, shamanic insights, energy healing, soul choice, and more, all to help you tap your own intuitive and healing skills. No ifs, ands, or buts.
Adopt US Kids presents Multiple Choice Parenting.
You've accidentally cut your daughter's bangs unevenly. Do you A, line things up a centimeter from her hairline?
Man, oh man, oh man, oh man, oh man.
No. Sweatbands are so hot right now. Everyone's wearing them. Like that basketball player and that other basketball player.
B, get spiritual.
Mom, where did all the mirrors go?
A reflection could never capture our true selves.
Huh?
Beauty is within.
C, look on the bright side.
Less time blow drying, more time texting.
Or D, show empathy.
Mom, you really don't have
Ta-da! Twinsies!
I kinda love it. As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information, contact You Gotta Believe at yougottabelieve.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Steven.
Who said that?
Me, down here.
Ugh, what are you, a yellow booger?
I'm a banana slug, Steven.
What are you doing in my room?
I'm your sense of adventure. It's been a long time since we've had an adventure in the forest.
Mom took me to the forest last year.
I'm a slug, Steven. It took me a long time to get here.
You're right. I should get out.
Yeah, the forest is not that far away.
Hey, Mom!
Come to the forest where the more adventurous you lives. Check out discovertheforest.org for cool places nearby. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Dr. Rita Louise. She's the author of the new book, Stepping Out of Eden. So, Rita, your new book starts with what a lot of families do during the holidays, breaking bread, but in a very different sense. Tell us about the odd genetics of wheat and what it means.
Sure. So, there's so much interest these days in looking at the possibility of genetic engineering in antiquity. And when we look at that, there are these extended periods of time that happen, and it's really hard for us to kind of take a step back and go, well, is this evolution or is this something else? But when you look at the evolution of domesticated grains, we find it becomes very stark what happened. that scientists to this day still can't explain. So about 35,000 years ago, right about the time we started to grind grains, they think they used cattails, and taking that into making like little pita bread, flatbreads, they were baking them. They discovered that they could use emmer wheat. They could grind emmer wheat and make that into a flatbread. But then, Victor, a miracle happened.
Tell us.
I know, because emmer wheat mixed with a form of goat grass, which transformed it into Elmer wheat. So basically, if you take a horse and a zebra, they'll mate and they can have an offspring, but it's going to be sterile, or a horse and a donkey. They can mate, they can have an offspring, but it will be sterile. And that's how it works. You can't take two separate species and mate them together and have a fertile, a child from that that can reproduce. Same thing in the plant kingdom. You can't take two unrelated plants. You can't take an apple and a cherry and make some cher apple thing and have a cher apple tree in your yard. It just doesn't work. But that's not what happened. So we had this emmer wheat, which mixed with goat grass, and the outcome was a fully viable product that was able to reproduce. They don't know how it happened, but it's a miracle.
And you go into the chromosomal structure in the book, without making it too complicated, just explain the chromosomal structure.
And so if we talk about, so let's say emmer wheat is, the genes are AA, so like in humans, we have XX and XY, so we're going to have AA. And then in the goat grass, it's BB. So when they mix together, what should happen is that the offspring should be AB, one set of genes from the emmer wheat and one set of genes from the goat grass, just like how, you get half from your mom, half from your dad. That's how it should be. But what ended up happening was that the genes doubled, and so we had AABB in this Elmer wheat. So it was 4 complete sets of genes versus half and half.
And why is that so significant?
Because in nature it can't happen, or it's not supposed to happen.
Okay, so is this indicating intervention?
I mean, that would be my interpretation of it.
Okay.
And what makes it interesting is that this change happened right at the advent of when we started baking bread.
Okay. Now, let me take it one step further. What does this seemingly miraculous wheat genetics have to do with us and the way we developed, especially our brains?
Our brains?
Our brains.
Well, I mean, it gave us, more carbohydrates to eat. I don't know that it had anything to do with our brains.
Oh, I misread the chapter then because you started talking about how the brain genetics. Okay, we'll just cut that out. Okay, let it go from that. So finish the point that you were making a thought about the wheat, and I cut you off. Go ahead.
But where it gets interesting is that 10,000 BC, right at the rise of domesticated wheat, so the rise of agriculture, pretty convenient timing. This emmer wheat, so the AABB plant, miracle plant, mixed with another form of goat grass, and it became modern wheat that we have today. Now it's AABBCC. And the part that makes me laugh is that, so you have one mutant plant that happens. I mean, if we take the big picture, okay, somehow we end up with a mutant plant with this genetic material, but they're trying to say that this one plant was so proficient that it was able to spread all over the place, or our ancestors recognized that this is a mutant plant and we should save these seeds. and replant them. But it gets even more interesting. You know, there is something that's called a rachis. And so the rachis is the part of the plant that actually holds the grain into the seed into the pod. And so earlier plants, they had what was called a shattering rachis. And so if you kind of like a dandelion, you know, or when they have the little white things on them, you know, they transform and have the little white floaty things, whatever they're called.
Yes.
You know, you bang into it and all the seeds come off. And so when a plant has a shattering rachis, it means that if you bang into it or the wind blows hard, the seeds are going to fall off and repopulate. Well, what's interesting is that wheat and then in China, rice, somehow, both at about the same time in our history, at the beginning of the domestication of plants, all developed plants that had non-shattering rachises.
Wow.
Which meant that you could bang into it and the grain wouldn't fall off.
So it made the grain hardier and obviously the harvests better.
It made the harvest definitely better.
Do people who have gluten intolerance, are they arachis-phobias? Never mind. That was a stretch. So, you know, where do the creation myths and the many variations of the myth fit into what we're talking about?
Well, when we start talking about the myths, you know, I mean, the E.T. Chronicles book gets all into that whole creation narrative. This one really starts with humanity, you know, the creation of humanity, and then our journey on the earth. And, you know, so when you start looking at the mythic record in relationship to humanity, I joke around and say, you know, we were kind of a pretty dumb lot, because everywhere you look, it says that the gods taught us everything. They taught us agriculture. They taught us what plants to eat. They told us what plants were good for healing. They taught us how to track the stars in the sky. You know, and you think, well, that's kind of Bible stuff or whatever. But there's a level of consistency that you find around the world of what they taught us. And it seems clear to me that these interventions of education occurred over vast periods of time, because when we learned to use herbal medicine, for example, goes back deep into antiquity. When we learned how to use fire, we're talking about, you know, over 1 million years ago. You know, and so the gods taught us to work with those things, as well as working with metal, which is a much more recent technological acquisition. How's that?
Very good. And that was a gift from Hephaestus.
Yep. I mean, if you're talking Greek. Mm-hmm.
And they were doing as never mind. I was going to say doing Hephaestus they can. Every time I get together with you, I get silly. I don't know why I get silly, but I get silly when I'm with you. All right. So, but myths are from the perspective of the teller, aren't they?
Exactly. And when we look at myths, one of the things that I've noticed was that there really is a separation in the myth, in the narrative that we find. And so I break them down as early myths and late myths. And so early myths are really these stories of the gods, and they are talking about their wars and battles and, you know, how they're scheming against each other to take over. And, you know, you have stories of Kronos castrating his father, and then, you know, go down the road. Zeus comes in and battles with Kronos and takes over the Greek pantheon, you know, and so we find these stories, and they continue, and they're always from the perspective of someone who seems like they're part of the gang. When we move into later myths, the gods aren't part of the stories. It's like we are looking to the gods and we're venerating the gods. And it's interesting because it changes from these stories of the gods talking to each other to us kind of praying and begging to the gods to help us and intervene on one level or another.
And what about the levels of fear?
That they imposed on us?
Yes, the fear that they had because of their omnipotence and power.
Well, they were our teachers. They were the people who formed us, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. And they had an expectation of being worshipped and revered. And that is a concept that you find even in the older myths, in the early myths. There are stories of the giants that, people talk about these days. And that was a requirement of the giants, was that they were supposed to revere and be submissive to these gods. So it's not just us. It's they definitely have this little power trip thing going on here. They want you to bend down and pray to them. You know what I mean? And revere them. And we still do it today.
My guest is Dr. Rita Louise. She's the author of the new book, Stepping Out of Eden. Rita, please tell our listeners where they can get the book and find out more about you.
They can go to my website, soulhealer.com. That's SOULHEALER.com, and purchase the book there, which I would really appreciate. Because it comes signed and everything. Or you can get it at your, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all your regular distribution outlets. And
your other website for healing?
Medical-intuitives.com.
And we'll be back with more of Dr. Rita Louise and Stepping Out of Eden after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
This is OTR-FM, part of the IOM Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is my dear friend, Dr. Rita Louise. We're talking about her latest book, Stepping Out of Eden. And since I started the intro off with a song lyric, another song comes to mind tonight, Ape Man by the Kinks. But there is something missing in the jump from monkeys to man, isn't there, Rita?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. And we've talked about this a little bit. I mean, there's the genetic part that has happened. But to me, the most important part, and where it gets kind of interesting, is really in the level of education and the level of programming that we as humans have experienced since I'm going to say the beginning of humanity, where I actually put that date I tie it to Homo erectus with the advent of culture and moving forward from that point in time with increasing levels of rules and regulations, and this is what you're supposed to do, to where now we do it ourselves.
So I guess my question is, in your extensive research, where do we, the humans or Homo sapiens, come from?
I believe that, we did come from a primate stock that was here on the earth, and that selective genetic engineering was performed to create who we are now. I mean, we have multiple stories about the creation of humanity, and they either, and there's always this implication of some genetic piece to it, and there are those that say that, we were created to be a slave race. I don't like that at all. I do feel, however, that we were bred to be a domesticated race, but that can take on a whole lot of different interpretations. And I think that we might have been domesticated to be some kind of animal of labor, horses, that's what comes to mind, not to necessarily be eaten. But when you look at the mythic record, there really aren't stories of the gods making us do something. So that would be how it would appear in the early myths, would be the gods would be talking about, well, I got these humans to do this stuff. Although we do see that a little bit in the Ramayana, but not really. And then when we get into the later myths, which is the stories of humanity interacting with the gods and us praying to the gods all the time, we don't have any stories that say those gods made us go to the mines again to go get them gold so that they can have it. I mean, we're not complaining about having to do this work.
So time for the magic question. Who are the gods and who is God?
Well, I will start with who is God first, because I think that's a easier question to skate around. So I believe that, there's God, as Giorgio Tsoukalos likes to say, with the big G, and that is this omnipotent, whether you want to call it a person or an energy or a dynamic or force that underlies everything that we see in the universe. And I think that from our limited understanding, we can't really understand who or what God is. And so I just put that over to the side and say, that's not for me to know. And I'm just going to have faith in that there is something that we came, in the big picture from something. And we choose to call that God. But then there's gods that you find in the Bible or we find in these mythic narratives. But, it's the Western world that put the word God on these characters. In Australia, they call them the sky heroes. And Native American cultures, they call them the sky gods. You know what I mean? But it's a different interpretation of who and what these individuals are. The way I like to make a separation is that when we think of God, the big G God, we often imagine him, I'm just going to say him for ease of talking, as being omnipotent, that he can create whatever he wants, with his will, whenever he wants. I always bring up the image of, here's one of my Star Trek connections, of Q from Star Trek Next Generation, because he was omnipotent. And he could snap his fingers and a mariachi band would appear. And he would move his arm and the Enterprise would be sent, thousands of light years away. Now, that's what you would expect a god to be able to do. But that's not what we find in myth. what we find in myth are these individuals who are dependent on certain levels of technology. They have celestial chariots that will take them across the sky and take them wherever they want to go. They have magical weapons that they can use to fight with each other. You know, we have Thor and his lightning bolts, and we have the Triton of Poseidon, you know, and these stories are filled with these magical weapons. You know, they had implements that would allow them to change form. So like Freya out of Norse cosmology would wear a feathered cloak. And when she put this feathered cloak on, she could soar through the skies like a falcon. You know, and so there's always this level of technology that underscores everything that they're doing. Well, if you're omnipotent, why do you need technology? And it's really only in recent times that we can look at these stories and go, well, you know, that kind of sounds like a laser. You know, or that kind of sounds like this.
Or the Vimanas sounding like aircraft.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So this leads to the next magical question. Was there some hanky-panky between early forms of humans and the gods?
Oh, very much so. You know, that's pretty prevalent in literature. You know, and it comes in two different forms. I mean, individual gods would go and mate with humans. You know, so we had Zeus, who was prolific, would come down and have relations with human women quite regularly. And he would come down in the form of a swan or the form of an ox or, you know, some other shape, because it was believed in Greek cosmology that if you saw the face of God or the gods, that you would most certainly die. You know, so apparently they didn't look human-like. That's my guess.
Okay.
You know, but then we have stories like, you know, that come out of the Bible, the sons of gods and the daughters of men, where, you know, this group of gods come down and they see that the women are beautiful and have relations with them. You know, and the byproduct of these relations, whether it's Zeus, whether it is Gilgamesh, who is that they were demigods. They were half god and half human. You know, and if they were a demigod, they would take on some of the capabilities of their shire. You know, so, you know, whether that was increased strength, you know, increased speed, you know, so if you were the god of wind, you would be able to move around really quickly or be able to leap vast distances because you could travel on the wind because your father was the god of wind. And so you got some of their capabilities as part of your genetic inheritance.
And where does alien inbreeding or hybriding come from?
Well, you know, you just have to take like a little step and go, well, if I change the word God and say alien, these stories really make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
You know, and I just choose to say the word gods because that's how myth refers to them. You know, people get kind of cranky. They're like, well, it doesn't say the aliens. It's like, well, no, it doesn't say the aliens. But I don't think it's really that big of a leap, you know, because there are things that they talk about in the mythic record that we find in contemporary ufology, which is the next book. You know, that you read these encounters, you know, for example, Moses, you know, he is meeting with God on Mount Sinai. You know, and a cloud comes down and there's thunder and lightning and this booming voice comes down from the top of the mountain and it scares all the Israelites. Well, you read that story and you look at some contemporary stories of UFOs and they seem very parallel.
The burning bush that doesn't consume itself, some type of energy source.
Well, you know, there's a whole chapter on finding God through chemistry in the book. Mm-hmm. And this one author suggested that perhaps he was burning, I don't remember the name of the tree off the top of my head because maybe I can find it real quick, but that he was actually burning acacia tree, which has hallucinogenic properties. That he was actually burning that tree, and that was how he was connecting with Source, was through achieving an ecstatic state through, a psychedelic means.
And take off your shoes because you're on holy ground. How about grounding yourself?
Mm-hmm. But it also is part of that whole worship and veneration and ritual, which I get into a lot, because if some place was considered sacred, then the rules that apply to it were very different than the rules that were, day-to-day rules. And so if the ground was sacred, then it just was.
My guest is Dr. Rita Louise. Her latest book, Stepping Out of Eden. And we'll be back with more of Dr. Rita after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Change and growth are part of natural life and also part of your spiritual life. Everyone needs support and guidance, especially during life passages. Upgrade yourself with the OMTimes Experts program. With OMTimes Experts, you have access to the best intuitive coaches, spiritual teachers, counselors, astrologists, and oracles. Our team was carefully selected so you can trust. Find out more at experts.omtimes.com.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
Looking for inspiration?
Want to be inspired?
Not sure where to go?
Find Mark and Kim every Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern on Inspired Living.
Topics will elevate consciousness and range from metaphysics to the human and social experience and all things spiritual.
Welcome to an inspired community that offers support, encouragement, and new ways of thinking. You are the inspired and the inspiration.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this evening, Dr. Rita Louise, talking about her new book, Stepping Out of Eden. Rita, how does language fit into this whole story?
Well, language really sits underneath our ability to communicate with each other. So it's essential in order to create, I'm gonna say this, but it's essential in order to create society, because in order to have a set of laws, there's how we act naturally. Like your dog does stuff. If it has a thing on its ear, it'll scratch. It will interact with other dogs in a certain way, and they'll make a pack. and live that way. But we have been trained to not necessarily follow our inner guidance and our inner urges. And so laws and rules and taboos were created. Well, in order to communicate that information and to have a higher functioning community, language had to be created. But there are those that believe that when you are in a deep connection with God, and I believe this, so when we're connecting to source, when we're connecting to our higher self, when there is a strong connection via our seventh chakra, which I think people that listen to this network probably understand, there aren't words, and so the Sands people in Africa call that the first world, where it's a fluid world and there's energy that just moves around and you're one with it, and we don't separate ourselves from that, but for some reason, some might say this is because of the fall of man. I think it's because of language. It's like we started naming things, and naming things took them out of the flow because now we're not in the experience anymore. We're observing the experience and reporting something that we observed. And so language takes us out of that first world and that direct communication, that direct connection with spirit. And it's interesting because people that have esoteric experiences or that, are in deep and profound meditation, if you ask them, well, what did they experience? They really can't, because they can't put words to it. It's too complicated, too challenging to try to explain. And even though you have the words to say of what it is, it really doesn't transmit the essence of it.
There was a book many years ago called The Alphabet versus the Goddess by Leonard Schlein. Are you familiar with the book?
No, I'm not.
This is something you would be fascinated by. And this guy hypothesized that prior to written language, that most of us were using the right side of our brain, the intuitive side, the side which is creative and communicates in the way we're talking about. And that when written language came along and people started using their right hand to hold a hammer and their left hand to hold a chisel and were hammering that way, that it switched the hemisphere and that the focus went from the right brain to the left brain. And at that point, it went from the goddess worship to the masculine god worship at that point in time. And that's where men, my gender, sort of screwed things up.
And these other groups, these indigenous groups, suggest that it was even with verbal language. I think written language probably put the period at the end of the sentence. But even with verbal language, that it took us out of being in that direct and connected flow. There's a story from the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it talks about this one character, Enkidu, who's Gilgamesh's friend. But Enkidu was considered a wild man, and he lived in the fields, and he ate grains and grasses with his mouth. And so they rein him in, and he is taught the ways of society. And he hangs out with all the animals in the field, and they're all his friends, you know what I mean? So he's all cool. But when they bring him in and teach him the ways of humanity and dress him in regular clothes and, that kind of thing, and he goes out to hang out with his animal buddies in the field, and they won't have anything to do with him anymore. Because he's different now. And we have stories that actually come out of Native American culture that talk about a time where we could communicate with the animals, and we did live and interact with the animals. And now when we try to interact with them, they run away because they're afraid of us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We started touching on this a little bit. In Levitical law, it was forbidden to know or utter the name of God, and this prohibition seems to have been ensconced in other religions too. Why this prohibition?
they have prohibitions upon prohibitions, and not just Leviticus, although the things that you see in Leviticus are pretty consistent. But in antiquity, there were things that were considered sacred, and there were things that were considered, I want to say taboo, but things that they were considered defiled. And I don't necessarily agree with this analysis, but I think most people will get it. So menstrual blood was considered, defiled, and so the people had to be separated, and they had to do ritual purification in order for them to come back into the community. And so there were things that would make you be like contact with the dead, would make you be defiled, and you would have to have a period of separation and go through ritual purification before you could come back into the community. So that was on one end. But then there were things that were considered sacred. And so the king or the god king or the god were ultimately sacred. And so depending on the culture, if the god king was eating out of a bowl and was eating some popcorn, nobody could eat the popcorn because it was the king's or, the god king's popcorn. You couldn't use the bowl because the bowl was sacred because he touched it. And so if you touched that bowl, now you would be taboo. So taboo just means that there's a restriction, either a restriction because it's too divine or it's too bad. So like dead people, too bad. And so saying the god king's name or the god's name was considered too sacred. And it's interesting because you find a similar parallel in some cultures where they won't utter the name of a dead person.
This concept of not knowing or being able to verbalize the name of God, though, doesn't that also come from this concept that if someone knows the name, basically they claim the power, or that the deity has no power?
I mean, there are some cultures that have that belief, where you can take their power or you could do some kind of black magic against them. But my understanding, the more consistent narrative is that it was just too sacred. It was too holy to use in common vernacular.
You have an extensive study of body modification and stepping out of Eden, something that's seen a resurgence today with body art, tattoos, and piercings. Why did this practice develop?
Well, my feeling is that it was used for identification. And so if you looked at a person, we can't do this now because we have lost so much of, and I'm going to say the library, and I'm going to go on a little tangent here. So in India, there's something that are called mudras, and mudras are hand gestures. And so if you look at a statue of Buddha, he might have his thumb and forefinger touching with his other three fingers up in the air, or he might have his hands on his lap. And depending on which fingers are touching and where the position is it up or down, whatever, they all have different meanings. And so I feel like we have lost what the meanings are. And so in antiquity, if there was a person like a Maori warrior, which they have a very strong tattooing tradition, if they walked over, you would be able to know everything about that individual's history based on the tattoos that he had. The placement of the tattoos, the imagery on the tattoos. And so I feel like they were used as a system of identification of people, which I could go into, and I know we're getting close on time. So I'll just stop there and open it up for a follow-up question.
What would you like readers to take away from stepping out of Eden?
Well, one of the things, what I took away, I'll just share what I took away from this, was that, two things. One was that as humans, it was very important for us to have this connection to the divine. And I'm not talking about, the gods that we find in the Bible that are flying around in the chariots with the weapons. I'm not talking about those guys, but the one that we find through ourselves and through meditation and through ritual and through self-exploration. And so I feel like, and that has been something that has been very important to the human experience since the beginning of time. And then the other part was just this level of programming that we have enculturated ourselves to, and that we just don't even recognize the depth and breadth of it. And at this point in time, we really can't turn it around because it is what it means to be human.
So that connection to the divine is essential to our human experience.
It sets us free.
It sets us free. Her name is Dr. Rita Louise. Her book is called Stepping Out of Eden. Rita, please tell our listeners one more time where they can get your book and find out more about you and your work.
soulhealer.com. And please, if you are interested in getting a copy, buy it from my website. Amazon takes way too much money. And it comes autographed and everything. And if you're interested in my health and healing services, it would be medical-intuitives.com, or just type Rita Louise into a search engine and I'm everywhere.
Rita, it's been way too long. We got to do this again and do it soon.
Okay, sounds perfect to me.
And thank you all for joining us this week on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor the Voice Furman. Have a wonderful week.